Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. My name is Councillor Camilla Maxood, and I'll be chairing today's meeting. Today's meeting is being live streamed on the City Council's website so that the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves. Please remember to turn off your microphone once you've introduced yourself. Go to Kate.
Hello, I'm Kate Sadler, the lead officer for the committee.
Hello, my name is John Illingworth. I'm a councillor for Kirkstall Ward.
Good afternoon, Paul Triswell, councillor for Middleton and Belle Isle.
Afternoon, Councillor Pauline Graham, councillor for Crossgates and Winmore Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Gower Almas from Beeson and Holbeck Ward. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Shona McFarlane, Deputy Director, Adults and Health and Caldecott Guardian.
Good afternoon, Louise Whitworth, Head of Cyber and Information Governance and Data Protection Officer for the Council.
Good afternoon, my name is Louise Booth. I'm the Head of Internal Audit for the Council.
Good afternoon, Tim Rollett from the Council's Intelligence and Policy Service.
Afternoon, Jonathan Foster, Senior Audit Manager.
Hello, Mary Hasnip, Head of Finance within Corporate Financial Management.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Alex Watson, Head of HR.
Good afternoon, Jessica Dolphin, HR Service Manager.
Good afternoon, Bridget Ellis, Deputy Chief Officer, Financial Services.
Hello, Victoria Bradshaw, Chief Financial Officer for the Council.
Good afternoon, Paminda Sethi, Grant Thornton, External Auditors.
Afternoon, everybody. Gareth Mills, Grant Thornton, External Audit.
Afternoon, everybody. I'm Rebecca Roberts. I'm the legal officer to the committee.
Good afternoon, Linda Wild, independent member.
Mike Foster, councillor for Ardsley and Robin Hood.
Good afternoon, everyone. John Grieve, Governance Services, and I'll be clerk in today's meeting.
And we've also got Leonardo joining us on Zoom. Is that right?
Should be, Chair.
I've just had a message to say Leonardo is having difficulty hearing us. Any suggestions?
Sorry, it's a Zoom issue.
Okay. Shall we move to the agenda item number 1?
Thank you, Chair. Agenda item 1, appeals against refusal of inspection of documents. We've had no inquiries about inspection of documents. Under agenda item 2, there are no items we need to exclude the press or public from. Agenda item 3, late items. With no late items as such, but we have got some supplementary information. We've already circulated the IS 260 report. All members should have a copy of that. And we've recently circulated this note, which is an amendment to this statement of accounts. And I think, again, all members have received that. Agenda item 4, declarations of interest. Can I ask any members to declare any interests? I see none, so I'll assume that's none. Apologies for absence. Yes, Chair, we've got Councillor Bentley and Councillor Harland who've sent their apologies. Thank you.
Thank you. We're on item 6, minutes. Are the minutes a correct record of the meeting held on the 26th of November? Matters arising, item 7. Are there any matters arising on the minutes?
Yes, Chair, just to say on item 51 on the minutes to confirm that Council accepted the committee's recommendation to accept the invitation to opt into the PSSAA procurement exercise for an external auditor.
Thank you, Kate. Do members have any further matters to raise? We'll go on to item 8. Notes of the consultative meeting. Are the members content to receive the notes and approve the recommendations made by the consultative meeting of the members of this committee held on the 17th of December? Thank you. Item 9. Are there any matters arising from the notes?
3 matters arising from the notes, Chair. On item 4, colleagues from Glasgow have provided those details requested in relation to the respondents to the questionnaire that they sent out, and the head of audit will be in position now to have those conversations that the committee asked her to have. Item 5, the partnership checklist was circulated to all members on the 21st of January, and item 8 on those notes, the CSQ data was analysed and finally circulated last night.
Do members have any further matters to raise? Okay, we'll go to item 10. This is the annual update report on integrated digital services control, and that's Leonardo. If you can hear us.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Good afternoon, Leonardo. We can hear you.
Good afternoon. Okay, so if it is okay, I can start. Okay, so the purpose of the report is to provide assurance on the management control of the integrated digital services service. As you know, IDS provides services to council, CCG, but also other organizations like GP Practice, Aspire, etc., that has not changed. We provide a number of services, and the report includes on point 3 the responsibilities of the division and function in terms of the services that we provide, and that range from providing support for IT equipment, providing support and provision to support business cases, etc., etc. So there is a list on point 3 that hopefully you can see from the report. As per previous reports, there are a number of KPI which are in place within the IDS service function in relation to the services that we provide, particularly around the service center or help desk, for which the performance is tracked on a monthly basis through our IDS senior leadership team. We observed a reduction in terms of service last year, in terms of the call waiting times increasing, and we have taken action to actually address that issue, and I'm pleased to say that that is much better than what we observed during the later part of 2021. And that recovery plan is still in place. We have changed the ways of working, but we have also added capacity to ensure that we have a better service. There are numerous external suppliers which works with IDS, and we have in place contract owners which manage their supplying performance, and that has been in place before, and that will continue as well. There are also a number of contracts which are, contracts are reviewed in line with the procurement rules, and IDS actively manage the renewal and the re-procurement of those contracts, and these activities overseen by the IDS sourcing team. We made changes in the ways that we authorized procurement last year, and I'm pleased to say that all procurements which involves technology now requires the sign-off of the Chief Digital Information Officer, and that ensures that what we procure from a technology perspective is following the technology strategy that we have set for the authority and also for the other organization that we support and provide services to. There are a number of contracts which are in place, which have associated budget for IT system, which sits outside IDS, and it sits within council directorates. I'm pleased to say that we have agreed recently with the corporate leadership team that the transfer of those budgets will happen in April this year, and those budgets will move to IDS, and IDS will take responsibility to manage associated budget for IT system which were not under the control of IDS. That will help us to also ensure that we drive efficiency for the totality of the budgets which are allocated to IT systems. We've done a lot of work on digital roadmaps last year, and we have those in place for the different service areas. Course roadmaps are documents which are live documents, and those will continue to change and will continue to include changes as services are required from each directorate. And those are the plan for what the technology needs to deliver within the IDS service, and that includes things like maintenance of system, upgrade, replacement, etc., etc. We have established a new digital board as a control mechanism last year, and that digital board is responsible to manage the entire portfolio of digital activities, and it is currently represented by chief officer within the local authorities. And but very soon it will also have presence from CCG members in terms of ensuring that we oversee the totality of the portfolio for the CCG and the local authority, and also we prioritize accordingly the activities that we need to perform. There is included in Appendix A the terms of reference for your information. There is an escalation from the digital board into the corporate leadership team in case that is needed. Additionally, we have established a new technology or a technical design authority last year, and that has been in response to my challenge to ensure that we have all the right architectural strategy and design principle, and that we observe them as well for anything that we procure or start to build from a technology solution. So that has been put in place in the first part of the financial year, and that's working well, and that is aligned into the digital board. And the terms of reference are also available as well for that body. We have also started to work on different ways of working. Traditionally, IDS has developed following a concept which is called waterfall. We are training and moving the authority to a more iterative and development techniques, which will speed up our delivery of solutions, but also will increase the management and tracking of projects, because we will manage project in smaller chunks or iteration. So that is just to note that that ways of working is actually started to be put in place, and also that will help with managing our capacity better moving forward. Last year, we also put in place a portfolio of a reporting for the entire portfolio of work. We have done that for the authority and also for the CCG. That covers all the project and programs with related KPIs on times, including recently also cost as well. And I'm pleased to say now that we have also forecast in place on a weekly basis, and also for the next 12 weeks forward. There's been a lot of work that has gone into establish the resource forecasting needed, because that helps us with budgeting and understand what will be the delivery within the next 6-9 months and etc. So we continue to capture time spent on activity like project through timesheets, and we are in the phase of implementing the tools right now And next week we should have the first version, which will tell us, the first version of the output of that tool that will give us a view of the forecasting of all the resources for all the projects that we have currently in place for the next 3 months, which has been quite a fantastic achievement with a team of around 500 people spread around the local authority and the CCG. The Information Security Assurance and Compliance Board has been established, and that focuses on ensuring that we manage compliance risk and that we ensure that we have the right remediation against security vulnerability, and that the appropriate IT health checks are planned and are also executed. This board has replaced the Compliance Board, we have also an escalation of compliance security of vulnerability are managed into the IDS senior leadership team on a monthly basis, and also to the Information Management Board. We have included a confidential Appendix B, which shows the cyber team planning and progress report. We reviewed, as I mentioned a moment ago, that monthly within the SLT, and we discussed therefore what needs to be done in terms of remediation to each of the vulnerabilities that are highlighted. Of course, that is for technical vulnerability, and as you know, it doesn't remove the residual risk of having a vulnerability of cyber incident created by human error. The Information Management Board continues to provide oversight on all information governance project and activity, and we have the terms of reference in Appendix B as well. The work on digital inclusion continues, and since 2015, the Infrastructure Investment and Inclusive Growth Scrutiny Board has led an inquiry into the digital inclusion with an annual report from the Chief Digital Information Officer. The next one is due in April 2022, so in April this year, and the regular updates are provided to this senior leadership team regarding the work and progress, including also measurement, which we started to put in place regarding return on investment on the work we do as part of digital inclusion. Last year, we also kicked off a new piece of work, a new initiative, the creation of the Office of Data Analytics, which will serve the city in terms of providing visibility to the right data, being the single source of truth, and helping, particularly when it comes to system flow or population health management. That board, that function is active. We have also created an Office of Data Analytics board as well, which oversees it. And we have also twice a month a ODA prioritization board, which prioritizes all activities of that data office as well. IDS has historically taken external benchmarking using SOCATIM, the Society of IT Managers. We haven't used SOCATIM recently, but we continue to actually benchmark ourselves in terms of customer measures, satisfaction, tracking internally, and reviewing the cost of contract and service performance, as I mentioned earlier on. There are a number of all internal audits which we are subject to for different aspects of the service that we provide from IDS and the performance. The areas of focus for those audits are agreed between the CDIO and the internal audit as well. And the outputs are reported by the head of internal audit to corporate governance and audit committee. And lastly, as you can see in the report, point 24, we are in the process of reviewing our business continuity plan from a system perspective, but also from a process perspective. And we're working closely with the resilience team to ensure that we have the right service and measurement in place to address business continuity plan. So hopefully that gives you a brief summary of the main part of the report.
Thank you, Leonardo. Are there any questions from members? Councillor Truswell?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to preface my questions with a comment that the performance of the council's IT and digital functions has been a source of some concern over the years, I think, to this committee, it's fair to say. So it is really, I think, something to be welcomed that we've now got a very reassuring and comprehensive report from Leonardo and his colleagues, and I think, you know, we ought to reflect that. One quick observation on digital inclusion. Leonardo's right. The Infrastructure Scrutiny Board did conduct an inquiry into digital inclusion, I think probably 5 or 6 years ago now, and we'll be getting an update both at its next meeting in the context of inclusive growth, but a fuller update on the recommendations in that report. I've got just 2 questions. The first one relates to page 26, right at the very top, or the second paragraph. There's reference to the collaborative work with the Leeds CCG. Now, as we know, the CCG will cease to exist in a couple of months' time, and it will be subsumed into the new, I think it's integrated care system. And I just wondered whether that has any implications for that partnership work. Will it be business as usual, or does it present any challenges, given the fact that that local commissioning function is kind of being drawn upwards to a more regional level? And my second question, completely separate, relates to paragraph 4 on the same page, page 26. And it relates to the reduction in SLA performance regarding the service call centre waiting times. That was, as the report says, reported to this committee, but I just wonder when we're going to receive an update on the implementation of the plan that was developed to deal with that. And I suppose I just throw in a question, is this also being monitored by Strategy and Resources Scrutiny Board?
Okay. On the first point, it is business as usual. We had several conversations with the ICS stakeholders and with Rob Wester as the CEO and his team. So they realized that IDS is a combined service between the local authority and the CCG, and also oversee the digital city strategy. And at the moment, there are no plans in line to change anything. It is business as usual. That's what I'm aware of through the conversation also I had with Tim Riley from the CEO of the CCG. Again, there are no plan for that to change. Of course, as the ICS will form, there might be different requirements in terms of what the IDS team will have to deliver. There is currently ongoing work in terms of establishing the right infrastructure and services that from a digital perspective are required to the ICS, but that is part of the normal delivery of the resources that we have in place, providing services to the CCG. No contracts have been put in place. The only things are changing are just the contractual side of the IDS colleagues which are employed by the CCG, and the contracts of those people are moving to the ICS, but the contract stays as it is. There's just a change of name, so it's moving from the Clinical Commission Group to the ICS. So at this moment in time, I'm not reporting any changes or impact to that team and to the collaboration with the local authority based on what I'm aware of. So that's on the first point. Are there any further questions on that point before I move on to the next one?
Councillor Illingworth? Oh,
sorry, it was my question about the SLA on the call.
Yeah, okay. On the second point on the SLA, so for the call center, so we have put in place, as I mentioned, measurement to recover those SLA. They are monitored actively by also the Director of Resources. I think we are in a position this month actually to report on how the performance have improved, which have improved significantly. We had the call waiting time, which went from 2 hours to something like 10 minutes or less. So we are in a position actually this month to provide the output of that recovery plan.
Okay, Chair, thank Leonardo for that answer. It is an improvement that's needed because it's a crucial public-facing service.
Councillor Illingworth.
Yes, Chair. My question is about the development of digital mapping and training courses associated with that. I certainly, as elected member, have found digital maps enormously useful and also very informative in terms of quantifying need, quantifying disadvantage, and looking for where resources should be allocated. In fact, it seems to be a natural computer technique that sits with politics very well and very productively. So I'd like to ask what plans there are to develop digital mapping. It's obviously quite good in the authority at the moment, but it can be better. What plans for development? And also, what about training courses, both for officers and elected members, where I think they're becoming very useful?
Okay, so there are a number of tools that we use to provide digital mapping and related mapping services within the authority and also outside the authority, because it's something that we will use also as part of the Office of Data Analytics in terms of providing alpha-related metrics based on positioning within the city. So there are plans to further develop that, to bring in additional services to actually provide services on the map, on demand as well. In terms of training and additional to members, etc., that's something that I probably need to come back and to this body with an answer of what else can be provided.
Yeah, yes, that's very welcome. I look forward to hearing reports about training. It's something which I think is badly needed. And the other thing which is occasionally a source of difficulty is the availability of suitably large screens. That obviously doing digital mapping, you need a decent display and decent resolution. You don't need that all the time, but it would be good if there was some equipment available for mapping that members and officers could use, even if they weren't full-time users, and obviously they need training to exploit those resources.
Okay, we'll consider that as part of requirements when we review our equipment. I will make sure that that is included.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any further questions from members? Councillor Foster.
Thank you. Yeah, the digital board, I'm just asking whether that replaces any existing group or delegation, or is that an additional layer of administration? And also, I know the board's made up of members and officers. How does the decision-making process work with that? How does it work with things like voting rights?
So the digital board is an additional function. It doesn't replace anything. What we have, what I established very quickly when I started my new role last year is that a lot of projects were coming to the IDS function without being prioritized by many different areas within the local authority and CCG, with over 300 projects concurrently working and with a capacity that cannot deliver on all the projects. So what was needed was a board which had the right representation, hence why each directorate has nominated the chief officer to represent their directorate at the board, to review each business case from a digital perspective, but also to agree on the prioritizations, which is something we are moving on to, particularly now with our new visibility on resources and capacity. There are a set of criteria which establish the way that the board prioritizes, and those are presented by the portfolio management office inside IDS to the digital board for consideration. We can provide circulation of those criteria, which will explain how projects are prioritized, which leads to the answer to the question you mentioned. So we can provide that list of criteria.
Councillor Foster, is that all right? Would you ask? Yeah. Any further questions? Thank you, Leonardo.
Thank you very much.
Item 11 is the annual information governance report, including the annual report of the Caldecott Guardian. I now invite Louise to present the report. This will be Louise's last attendance at the committee after a number of years advising the committee. So thank you very much for all your support, Louise, and you're going off into the sunset. So a round of applause. Thank you, Louise.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm blushing now, so apologies. Good afternoon. This is the annual information governance report to the committee. The report is presented in line with this committee's new template, but also includes the requirement of the Information Commissioner's Office accountability framework. And just to make members aware that the Information Commissioner's Office introduced the accountability framework early last year. This is a really useful tool, and as a council we decided to work towards the framework because should there be a time when we are audited by the Information Commissioner's Office, it is against the accountability framework that we would be measured, and therefore it felt fit that we included those elements of the accountability framework into this report so that we could show that we were working towards that. Also to make members aware, in August 2021, the National Data Guardian issued guidance on the appointment of Caldecott Guardians, their role and responsibilities in respect to data processing activities undertaken within their organisation. The guidance underlines the relationship between the Caldecott Guardian and information governance professionals within an organisation and with decision makers, making it very clear that that relationship is very important and that those people should work very, very closely together. Just for your assurance, obviously we've got Shona here today, but the Council's Caldecott Guardian and delegates receive a quarterly performance report from the Information Governance and Cyber Service, covering all aspects of information governance, including projects, information security incidents, and information rights requests. So just to make you aware that the Caldecott functions are essentially very much intertwined in with the information governance functions. There are a number of points which I would like to bring to your attention, specifically around changes and activities from the last 12 months. Some improvements have been made compared to last year on responding to statutory requests within the statutory time limits. This has been in part due to a change of structure and working practices in the newly named Information Governance and Cyber Service. A new operational structure was implemented in Q2 of 2021-22, which supports the move towards a more agile way of working with a new operational management layer responsible for managing and prioritising all work. This new layer is also leading on a rolling programme of change, which is currently underway. And whilst we accept that there has been some improvements, there is still more change to be had. The previous external review of the service and internal examination of the request team function, both undertaken in 2020 and 21, and reported to this committee in last year's annual report, highlighted a number of recommendations for change in order to increase delivery capacity, improve working practices and compliance with statutory requirements. In Q2 of 2021-22, the dedicated request team was disbanded as part of the new operational structure with clearly defined roles and responsibilities to all information governance and cyber staff. This new operational model supports the development of a multidisciplinary workforce intended to increase capacity to deal with information rights requests in a more efficient manner without the need to increase overall staffing numbers. The outcome of this programme of change is intended to inform other recommendations to create greater ownership with information asset owners across the council for processing and responding to information requests. By the end of this financial year, the intention is to submit a report to the corporate leadership team outlining further recommendations to improving performance in handling statutory information requests. With regards to training, the mandatory IG Level 1 e-learning development and rollout cycle is currently underway, with a provisional launch date to staff and elected members in mid-September 2022. The Information Governance and Cyber team are leading on a project to review and update the current data protection impact assessment template and process. The review will encompass all current DPIA templates used by other areas of the business. Just to make you aware, there are several different templates in use at the moment. So there's a DPIA for CCTV, there's a DPIA for ICT applications, for example, and this can get very, very confusing for services. So the intention is to bring all of those different templates together into one form. This will also include the digitisation of the form. So we will have a smart form whereby, for example, if you are dealing with CCTV, you would click on CCTV and then it would only bring up the questions you need to answer around CCTV. Internal Audit have recently carried out an audit on the DPIA process in order to provide assurance that there are appropriate controls in place to ensure that data protection impact assessments are completed where required. This project, as I've just described, will encompass the internal audit's findings and recommendations. With regards to cyber, this committee will be aware that the Council was successful in regaining its PSN certificate award in October 2021. In addition to that, the Council have completed compliance statements for Cyber Essentials Plus. Cyber Essentials Plus is a UK government-backed, industry-supported certification scheme introduced in the UK to help organisations demonstrate operational security against common cyber attacks. These have been signed off by the Chief Digital Information Officer and the CIRO, and the Council's assessment is scheduled, well, I say for February 2022, it is actually happening at the moment over the next couple of weeks. On a lighter note, you will notice that a cyber newsletter was introduced earlier this year. This was initially to raise the profile of cyber to CLT. However, it was so well received that the circulation of this newsletter has been widened to the Best Council leadership team and services such as risk management and performance. We are very happy to circulate this wider. Internal Audit have expressed an interest in receiving a copy, and following Chair's brief, we will be sharing the newsletter with the Chair of this committee. I also do want to point out, you will see that information governance was part of the survey of internal control, as you will have seen from other reports earlier this year. You will see that we were relatively comfortable with the results. The main areas of concern were around DPIAs and records management. I've already outlined the project and piece of work that we are doing around DPIAs, and hopefully that will address those issues and awareness will become more widespread when we do next year's survey of internal control. And there is also currently a data management program being developed to cover off records management. So again, hopefully that will improve. So that concludes the specific points I wanted to raise. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Louise. Any questions from members? Councillor Truswell?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. I'm not surprised that Louise did focus on the statutory and non-statutory information requests, because it did seem to be a glaring weakness that we needed to look at. It does seem that we will continue to be exposed potentially to successful complaints to the Information Commissioner, given the kind of downward trend of these figures, which hopefully will be addressed and redressed by the measures that that Louise mentioned. But I just wondered, has there been any benchmarking undertaken with other authorities to see whether they've experienced the same sort of downward movement in terms of response to particularly freedom of information requests? And could she perhaps tell us in a bit more detail what's being done to improve this, rather than just the fact that we've got a more efficient way of working? I think it'd be useful for us to know exactly how that's going to operate and hopefully take things in the right direction.
With regards to the first question, yes, we have done a considerable amount of benchmarking, and we did report that last year, Chair. We haven't done any this year. We got such an incredible amount of data from the reviews that we conducted last year and the benchmarking that we wanted to spend this year acting upon that. But it was very clear. We did some benchmarking against other core cities and also some other local authorities. Just to give the councillors some assurance, we weren't by any means the worst. There were 2 local authorities which were performing better than us, but the rest were significantly worse. So that's no excuse, but it did give some comfort. I would suggest that this is a national problem. And I do know that the Information Commissioner's Office has certainly been in touch with us as a local authority, and is currently undergoing a survey to look for where are the specific problem areas. Now, certainly in Leeds, there is a particular issue with responding to children's social care subject access requests, simply because the children's social care files can contain literally tens of thousands of pages, and each one of those has to be systematically gone through and redacted to remove any third-party information. Therefore, I think the average size of a subject access request in children's is 6,000 pages, and that's the average. So you can imagine the time it takes just to do the work for one request. So we fed that back to the Information Commissioner's Office. Obviously, we don't know what the outcome of the survey is that they'll be doing, but obviously it's clearly a national problem, because otherwise they wouldn't be asking local authorities what their sticky issues are. So I can share the benchmarking data if members would be interested in seeing that. Okay. The why, there's been a number of changes so far. Not to go through all of them, but the biggest change so far was the disbanding of the central requests team. So there was a request team of 8 members of staff who sat almost in a separate independent team within the information governance team. Now, that was all well and good, but it meant that they had very specialised knowledge on dealing with requests. But then when the pandemic hit, we suffered sickness, people were struggling with juggling childcare at home and trying to do requests. For some requests, staff were having to come into the office, and obviously with the restrictions, it caused a lot of problems. And it did become a blocker in that the knowledge to deal with requests was basically sat almost in an independent team within a team. So that team has been disbanded. Yes, they've got that knowledge, but as part of a programme of training for all staff within IM&G, so that's all 45 staff, everyone has been given basic level training in how to deal with subject access requests and freedom of information requests, and we are building on that. So yes, those 8 people will still continue to do requests, but should we hit a crucial point, then we've got other people within the team who we can turn to and share the burden. So I think that was a significant change that we've made, but obviously it takes time to train people up and get them to a standard. And as you probably appreciate, when staff are doing requests and they're learning, they all have to be peer checked. We can't just send them out. So it is a work in progress, but I think that's a significant change that will have quite a significant impact once everybody's up to speed. We've also looked at a number of processes and activities that the request team were undergoing. Originally, the IG teams and the individuals who were doing requests were spread around the council. This was quite a few years ago, and about 5 years ago, they were all brought into the central team. And some of those teams brought with them tasks that I would suggest are not for an IG request team to do, but they'd continued doing that work because they'd always done it. So we've systematically gone through saying exactly what work are you undertaking, what processes are you undertaking, and in those particular instances where they are not data protection or freedom of information roles, we are now in consultation with those service areas and saying, you need to take that work back into the directorate. So that will again give the team more capacity. Is that enough?
Yes, absolutely is, Chair, because Louise has not only answered my 2 questions, but also anticipated and answered my next one. So that's excellent.
That is very welcoming and assuring to hear as well, Louise. Thank you very much. Councillor Illingworth.
Yes, Chair. I was going to ask a little bit about use of CCTV for anti-social behaviour, which I'm sure other members will confirm is a constant nuisance in the ward. Graffiti, damage to allotment sites, damage to public open space, parks and so forth. Very often CCTV seems a possible help in what's normally a very unsuccessful exercise. We try to deal with this problem, but we don't succeed very often, and we don't catch the people responsible. So I'd like to ask a little bit more about that, particularly as I can see that CCTV often comes into contact with data protection rules, and it's something which the local authority, I think, should have play a bigger role myself, but I'd like to hear other people's views.
You're quite right, Councillor Illingworth. CCTV comes under the Surveillance Commissioner, but any regulatory action that can be taken against local authorities for the misuse of CCTV would be a data protection issue, and therefore does in part fall under information governance's remit. There is absolutely, if a legal basis for the use of CCTV for the prevention and detection of crime. I think where it can be quite difficult sometimes is being able to prove the necessity and the proportionality of CCTV. And that's where, when I was talking before about the DPIA, where that comes in. Because if it can be proved that there is a necessity for the prevention and detection of crime, and it's a proportionate solution to the problem, then absolutely CCTV can be used for that purpose. But it's just for the you have to be able to prove that you've gone through that bit of rigor in order to show that it's necessary.
Thank you for that, and it's much appreciated. One of the things I was keen to see, as you say, it shouldn't be overused and it should be proportionate to the size of the problem. Where I've seen it used successfully in the past, the one I can think of is a case in Hull, down by the docks in Hull, which was hugely successful, dealing with prostitution and drug peddling. But when the problem's solved, you want to move it on. In a sense, it should be a temporary measure that you bring in to deal with a particular problem. And then if you're successful, and was success the case I've studied, then you move it somewhere else and repeat the exercise. But that proportionality, I think, is very often or could easily be achieved by greater mobility and concentrating on mobile equipment that you could take from one place to another and use it to its full extent.
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth, for your comments. Any other questions from members? Thank you. Does the committee agree the recommendations set out in the report to consider the contents of this report and the assurance provided as to the council's approach to information management and governance, and suggest areas where they would like to see further focus? Thank you. We'll go to item 12, and that's the annual insurance report on employment policies and employee conduct. And I invite Jess to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the annual assurance report on the HR employment policy and conduct. So though HR covers a wide remit and initiatives in the organisation, this report focuses on specifically on our employment policies. So we are confident it's working well in line with our people strategy and our ambition of being the best place to work. We hold regular policy reviews with trade unions, and at present the disciplinary and grievance policies are planned to be reviewed in 2022. Throughout the pandemic, HR's focus has been on supporting the organisation through COVID and supporting staff to be reallocated to prioritise our frontline services that were under pressure as a result of the pandemic and that needed additional support. This included implementing a regular manager communications email to keep managers up to date on key changes relating to COVID. This included details on risk assessments and advice following central government changes. But this has now broadened to wider updates for managers about general employee information and any key policy changes. So at the end of 2020 and early 21, internal audit completed a review of the application of HR policies with respect to the impact of COVID. An opinion of substantial assurance was provided for the control environment, noting that HR policies had the flexibility to be adapted to the guidelines set by the government in response to the pandemic, and that the requirements had been effectively communicated out. Other HR activities referenced include the Register of Interest, Gifts and Hospitality and disciplinary policies, and these were still complied with throughout the pandemic in line with our council values. In addition, internal audit have recently commenced an audit looking at how the arrangements in place to manage the risks associated with employee outside interests have been embedded and complied with, and we expect the result of this to come later in 2022. In late 2021, the manager habits were reviewed and have been refreshed and are now expectations that apply to all of our staff. These have been shared with all employees through the appraisal cycle via the mid-year check-ins. There is a regular democratic oversight of HR activity through regular meetings of the HR leadership team with the executive member for resources and deputy leader of the council, as well as a regular cycle of information going through the resources scrutiny board. Through the review required for this report and the assessment and ongoing monitoring carried out, the Chief Officer HR has reached an opinion that that employee conduct is properly managed, policies are regularly reviewed, and employee conduct forms part of normal manager and employee relations. So that's a summary of the report, Chair, if there are any questions.
Thank you, Jess. Any questions from members? Councillor Foster?
Yeah, just one, just to help me understand, item 58 on page 76. You say there was 68 disciplinary cases concluded. However, you also acknowledged that was lower than previous years because of COVID. your ability to conduct meetings. So are there cases still outstanding because of COVID?
Yeah, so we have had a look at this, and at the moment we are confident that there isn't a backlog of cases. There are none outstanding. We're now running at a normal rate of what we would call our casework cases. And when we did this, there was a review done to make sure that the most important were prioritised first, and this was done with individual employees and the trade unions as appropriate.
Just on that then, I mean, I haven't gone through your disciplinary procedures, but did any cases fall by the wayside because you were unable to conclude them within a specified time frame?
Thank you, Councillor. We're not aware of that happening, Councillor. One of the reasons that perhaps saw the decrease in cases is probably that some of the services where we might have expected disciplinary action to occur have been closed through long periods through the pandemic, which may have alleviated some of the pressure on that, which has enabled us to concentrate on, as Jess said, the most important cases first and agree solutions around that. So we're not aware in terms of discipline that anything hasn't been properly investigated.
Thank you.
Any further questions from members? No. Does the committee agree the recommendations that are set out in the report to receive this report and the attached Appendix 1 as together providing key forms of assurance on the robustness of the Council's employment policies and employee conduct? Thank you. We will go to item 13. It's the Grant Thornton Audit Report, ISA 260. And I'd like to invite Gareth to present the External Auditor's Report. Thank you, Gareth.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this is our ISA 260 report. It's one of the, apologies. Sorry, Mary, you wanted to...
Sorry, Chair, I think it's the statement of accounts, isn't it?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Apologies, thank you, Chair. So the report presents the updated version of the accounts and Grant Thornton's audit report on them. So if I could just cover the issues with the statement of accounts first. A revised version of the accounts was circulated with the committee papers. That was the latest position as we knew it as at last Friday. There are two further changes that we need to make the committee aware of, and I've circulated a briefing notes covering those. So the first of those relates to pensions. So the version of the accounts that was circulated contained estimated figures for two items where we knew we would need to make an adjustment, but we hadn't yet received confirmation from the West Yorkshire Pension Fund of the exact figure. I have now received confirmation of one of those figures, and that is to do with the pensions assets. So the council's share of the West Yorkshire Pension Fund assets will need to increase by 42.8 million in comparison to the position of the draft accounts, rather than the estimated figure we circulated of 32.5 million. So there needs to be a further 10.3 million change. That will be a reduction in the net pensions liabilities and a corresponding change in the pensions reserve. The other area where we need to make changes is in relation to business rates and the latest position there. So we have reviewed the provisions for both appeals and the bad debt provision. In terms of the appeals provision, since the draft accounts were issued, the government has clarified that changes in circumstances due to COVID don't qualify as a material change in circumstances to support a business rates appeal. So the figures that we had put into the draft accounts to allow for those appeals that we have received, we can take those out. And as a result of that, the council's share of the overall appeals provision for business rates will reduce by 3.7 million. We've also reviewed the bad debt provision, and the collection rates subsequent to the end of last year have actually been better than we had anticipated. And as a result of that, we can reduce the bad debt provision for business rates, the council share, by 5.9 million in terms of the accounts. So taking those two issues together, there will be a £9 million increase in the level of retained business rates income that's reflected in the income and expenditure account, and a £9 million reduction in the council share of the deficit relating to business rates carried forward. Because of that improved position, we are entitled to less of the taxation income guarantee grant that the government has been providing in relation to business rates. So we will need to reduce the accrual for that by £5.5 million with a corresponding reduction in earmarked reserves. And finally, there's an increase of £750 in the levy payable to the regional business rates pool as a result of our improved position. The only other material change that we'd made since the draft accounts were issued was covered in the report, which is a reduction of £18.5 million in the value of property, plant and equipment as a result of a small number of errors in valuations being identified. As at today, we're not aware of any other issues that would need to be adjusted for other than final confirmation from West Yorkshire Pension Fund of that pensions liability figure. However, as Grant Thornton's audit work is still ongoing, there is a potential for further adjustments to arise either out of that audit work or as a result of potential post-balance sheet events happening before Grant Thornton conclude their audit work. So as a result of that, the recommendation in the report is that the committee should approve the accounts subject to the changes that I've just described, and to authorise the chair to approve any other non-material amendments that may arise before the conclusion of the audit. If there are further material amendments arising, then we would bring a final version of the accounts back to the next meeting of the committee in March for the committee to approve them. In a similar vein, Appendix 1 to the report is the management representation letter which Grant Thornton asked us to provide them with before the conclusion of their audit. Grant Thornton will want that letter to be signed at the end of their audit rather than as at today. Obviously because of the potential, again, for further events to happen. So I could confirm that as at today, officers are not aware of any issues that would prevent that letter from being signed, and members are asked to raise any issues which they're aware of. In terms of the recommendation, the committee is asked to authorise the chair to sign that letter on behalf of the committee at the appropriate time, subject to further review by officers and to the committee being consulted by email at that stage for any further issues they may be aware of. So I apologise that the situation is a little more complicated than it would normally be at this stage in the process. But if the committee are content to approve the recommendations on that basis, then all being well, we should be in a position to conclude the process and finalise the accounts before the next meeting of the committee in late March. And as I say, I would stress that if any other material issues do arise, then we will bring back a final version of the accounts to the committee in March to approve. So with that, I'll hand over to Gareth, and apologies for the issue there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, and thanks, Chair. So turning to our ISA 260 report, as I say, this is our key report summarising the key issues arising from the accounts audit of the 2021 accounts. I'll go through some of the key headline messages, Chair, and then Perminder will take you through some of the points of detail. So if you turn to section 1 headlines, we summarise there some of the key issues arising from the audit. I think it's important to note at the top of that right-hand side there that as of today's date, there are no audit adjustments that impact on the outturn position of the council or your level of usable reserves. So, you know, the bottom line of the council, if you like, there's no audit adjustments impacting on that based on our work to date. Members will recall from previous workshops that we've done around the work of external audit last summer and in the autumn last year, that a lot of our audit work focuses on the two high value areas of your balance sheet, your property, plant and equipment, or fixed assets as they used to be known, and your share of the West Yorkshire Pension Fund liability. And as Mary has already said, there are some adjustments coming out of our work in those two particular areas, which are highlighted on that initial page. Again, they are significant movements, but they don't actually impact on the level of usable reserves available to the council. So in addition to that, we've highlighted some presentational disclosure changes, which we're aware that management has actioned. There are some recommendations arising from our work, and we've included those in the action plan at Appendix A, and we've also followed up our recommendations from the prior year. Our work is ongoing, but is nearing completion, as Mary's just said. We've highlighted towards the bottom of page 3 some of the key areas where work is still being finalised. So we've already talked about PPE and the pension fund. Other key area probably on that list is the testing of operating expenditure, and also agreeing those accounts back to the council's ledger system. There is a final sort of quality review process check. Clearly myself, Perminder, and the independent review partner review the audit work as we progress, and that's been ongoing. And that will conclude up until we've got sufficient and appropriate audit evidence over all outstanding areas of our work. Just over the page in terms of value for money arrangements, again, members will recall the session that we did on the new VFM approach for 2021, and that the NAO for 2021 and indeed for 21-22 have effectively decoupled the audit timings of that work from the accounts opinion. So we will have up to 3 months from the date that we sign off your accounts to conclude our VFM work. We're hoping to conclude that work by the end of April, agree it with Victoria and other relevant senior officers, and then bring it to this committee at the June meeting. So that work does remain ongoing. As I say, a separate detailed report on the council's VFM arrangements will be coming to this committee in due course. In terms of statutory duties over the page on page 4, we've not had to issue any statutory recommendations or a public interest report. There have been 1 or 2 of those quite high profile in recent months by Grant Thornton and indeed the other external audit providers across the country. But just to be clear, there's been nothing of that nature here at Leeds. And then the final bit of our audit opinion is to issue our audit certificate that effectively closes down the 2021 audit. When we sign off your accounts, we won't be in a position to issue that certificate because 2 aspects of our work will be ongoing at that point. The VFM work, as I've already said, and then we're also required to do a piece of audit work on your whole of government accounts submission or your WGA accounts. And the guidance for that hasn't even been issued yet. So we won't be able to issue our audit certificate until those 2 areas of work have been concluded. So those were sort of the key messages in terms of the accounts audit. But I'll just ask Perminder now, Chair, just to talk through 1 or 2 of the key areas of detail in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Gareth. Before I take you on to the significant risks that we looked at, I think it's just important to draw out that our audit approach has been risk-based, and it looks at the council's internal controls and also involves substantive testing of significant transactions and material account balances. The other thing just to draw to your attention is on page 7, we're required to bring to your attention the level of materiality, which was 27.2 million for the council's audit. The significant risks commence on page 8, and these are the main areas of our audit work where we think there is a significant chance that the numbers that you've included in your accounts may be potentially misstated. And there are 2 significant risks that all auditors are required to consider. One is around the management override of controls, and that's around amending numbers that may actually impact on the outturn position. And principally, our work around that looks at journal entries and the overall arrangements that you have in place to look at the key reported numbers and assessments that you make around that. No issues have come out from our work around that, although we have yet to conclude on that area. Over the page, the second area that all auditors are required to look at as a significant risk is the risk of fraud in revenue recognition and expenditure. Now, in the audit plan, if you recall, we rebutted
this risk for both areas, income and expenditure, on the basis that there's little incentive for council and councils generally to manipulate revenue, given most of your revenue comes through central government, through revenue support grant and other grants, which are quite straightforward to tick off and agree. And secondly, the culture and ethical framework within local government, including at Leeds, which is strong, and that all forms of fraud are seen as unacceptable. So strong arrangements in place, which meant that we rebutted both of those particular areas. But that's not to say we've not done any work in those areas. We've set out on the right-hand side of the slide on page 9, the work that we've undertaken. No issues have come up from our work, just except for one, which is set out at the bottom of page 9 on the right-hand side, which is around the housing revenue account and dwelling rents being included in the draft accounts, being £1.3 million greater than the rent system. And that was down to a manual adjustment not being processed, which has now been actioned and corrected by management. Over the page onto page 10, this is where the main areas of significant work that we undertake and commence. Gareth mentioned sort of the big numbers in the accounts, PPE or land and buildings. And of course, land and buildings is one of the biggest numbers that you have on your balance sheet and in your accounts. And you can appreciate we will spend some time looking at each of those areas. Our work has identified 2 adjustments to date, one around other land and building valuations. When we were testing a random sample of rolling valuations, we identified 2 errors of 0.9 million, which overstated the valuation. Management then extended the same type of valuation to other areas just to make sure there were none, and a number of other ones were identified, which meant that the overall adjustment identified was £2.1 million. The second area is around the Temple Green Park and Ride valuation. You'd included land from phase 1 again in phase 2, so you double counted it, and that error resulted in an error of 16.4 million in total. That was along with the use some building costs that hadn't been properly dealt with. Over the page, just want to draw out in the sort of middle paragraph that in undertaking our work, we noted that your valuers have used a material uncertainty limitation on their valuations, which basically says they can't guarantee the accuracy of the numbers. There's more variability in it than might otherwise be the case, which was something that we experienced last year in the 1920 accounts because of the impact of COVID-19. The guidance from the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors was actually withdrawn, so we were surprised that that was in there and wouldn't expect to see it. So we did challenge management, who have conferred with the valuers, and management believe that that's something that you want to maintain and leave in, given the uncertainties that the valuers have given to management. So I think we just wanted to bring that to your attention. And secondly, just to let you know that when we issue our audit opinion, that's something that we won't be bringing to your attention as we did last year. Over the page, we then move on to investment properties, which again is a significant risk. It's quite a large balance within the council's accounts. We've not identified any issues relating to investment properties at this stage that we wish to bring to your attention. And then the next couple of pages are on the pension fund net liability. Again, a significant amount, about 1.7 billion in your accounts. Mary's already highlighted to you, I think, one of the adjustments. There are 2, and we're just waiting for the final confirmations to come through. So the first one we thought was 32.5 million, it's 42.8. And then we're just waiting for the final confirmation of the 16.1 million. 2, which is set out there. Over the page on to page 14, group accounts and group audit. You don't produce group accounts, but you do have group entities, including a number of subsidiary companies. You produce for us each year an assessment which determines whether, in your view, you need to produce group accounts or not, which we have received, and we're now currently looking at that. One of the recommendations we made in last year's audit findings report was that your group accounts disclosure would benefit by showing more information on the entities that the council deals with. That's something that the council has expanded in this year's accounts, but we feel some additional information would be appropriate, and that should be expanded further to include things like gross expenditure, gross income, the surplus deficit of the entity, as well as any gross assets and gross liabilities. The aim of that is that the user of accounts can actually see quite quickly in a table how big the entities are, who they are, and the impact they may have on Leeds City Council. There are a number of new risks and issues that have arisen in 2021, which are set out on page 15. IFRS 16, that doesn't come in to be fully adopted until 22-23, but there is a requirement for you to make reference to that, which you have done in the draft accounts. We've also undertaken work on grants income. Obviously, you've had a lot more grant income this year because of COVID-19. Significant amounts of money have flowed through the council, and it's looking at the arrangements, whether you've treated the monies as agent or principal. Again, no issues have come out from our work on that so far. Bottom of the page, our IT specialists undertook some reviews of your IT general controls arrangements within the council. They've raised a number of recommendations which are set out on the bottom of page 15 and the top of page 16, principally around SAP payroll, around user accounts with inappropriate access, which allows bypassing of controls. Secondly, around the segregation of duty and conflicts with user IDs. And then in respect of the financial management system, I believe, around reviewing failed logins for suspicious activity and a lack of review of information security audit logs. Recommendations have been made for each of those areas, and management have responded in the action plan at the back, which we'll come on to in a few minutes. There are also a number of key judgments and estimates, which are set out on page 17 onwards, that you use when you actually pull your accounts together. You'll recall the audit committee, but one paper was presented which set out management's approach to key judgments and estimates. We have reviewed those, and although we haven't concluded our work in them, in all areas at the moment, there are no specific areas that we wish to bring to your attention, other than on page 18, which is around the valuation date for fixed assets or land and buildings. You've moved that date from the 30th of September to the 1st of January. We consider it would be appropriate to move that to the year end, the 31st of March. So we've repeated our recommendations we had in last year. And secondly, just to bring to your attention again, the material valuation uncertainty, which I've already referred to. There were no issues arising on the net pension liability other than the outstanding information. And as I said earlier on page 21, that there's no issues coming out from our work around grants income to date. Page 22 sets out some of our work that we've undertaken on the minimum revenue provision. As you will be aware, the council is responsible on an annual basis to determine the amount that you charge for the repayment of debt, known as the minimum revenue provision. And that's something that has been in the press over the last probably year or so, and is a way around which authorities have dealt with that. There are 4 methods which are allowed by statute, in which case you can pick one of the 4 or a mixture of the 4. And as part of our work, what we did was we looked at the charge for 2021 and basically tried to estimate the period over which you were writing and recovering assets. And that came out at just short of 49 years. We would expect it to be 50 years or less. So for 2021, it falls within sort of what we would expect. If you compare this to the MRP charge for the prior year, it was much, much lower. And the reason for that was there was accumulated savings that you'd brought forward from overpayments in previous years, which helped to offset some of that charge, and some capital receipts also were used. We're going to be looking at MRP in a lot more detail as part of our value for money work, and we'll provide a commentary around that, and also the profiling of where the debt is. In our view, the use of the annuity method, which is the one that's predominantly used by the authority, results in a lower level of charge in earlier years and a greater charge in later years, but we'll sort of bring that more out in our report within the auditor's annual report. Moving on to page 24, and other communication requirements. We're not aware of any material issues in relation to fraud. We made a recommendation around related parties. We felt that in reviewing the related parties note at 12.4 within your accounts, the disclosures made by the council are in excess of the requirements we would expect. But having discussed this with management, you're not minded to reduce the disclosures as you feel they are helpful to the reader of accounts. Mary's already mentioned the letter of representation, so I won't go into that again. And then just at the bottom of page 24, we've also made reference to working papers. We made a recommendation last year, which tried to draw out the working paper numbers agreeing to the accounts and to the FMS system, which hasn't really been straightforward to follow for us again this year. So we've re-raised that recommendation going forward. We, as Gareth mentioned, we do have other responsibilities under the code in relation to other information which are published along with the annual accounts, including the annual governance statement and narrative report. There are no issues that we wish to bring to your attention. We identified a few minor presentational matters which are being amended. Whole of government accounts, you'll be aware this is something that we are required to complete before we conclude and certify the audit. The guidance hasn't yet been issued, so that work cannot commence at this stage. And just to say that whilst we'll be able to issue our opinion on the financial statements, we won't be able to certify the closure of the audit until the whole of government accounts work has been concluded, along with the value for money work and issue of our auditor's annual report. We don't have any issues to report to you on independence and ethics. We provide one additional service to you, which is the Chief Financial Officer Insights database software that you subscribe to. That subscription ended at the end of March 21 if you've not renewed that. So that's just a record of the amount that was paid relating to 2021. The appendices, which are Appendix A, the action plan, we have documented the management responses received, which will follow up as part of our planned programme of work next year. Appendix B sets out prior recommendations. Appendix C is an important one to be aware of. That's the audit adjustments. A number of numbers are in red to be confirmed, and we will adjust those once we've finalised and agreed the numbers, including, for example, on the pensions fund. Page 42, just to bring to your attention, there are no unadjusted misstatements that have been identified from our work. Appendix D on page 43 sets out our audit fees, which are per our audit plan. And then the letter of management representation is shown at Appendix G. I'll pause there, but we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Parminder. Are there any questions from members? Councillor Illingworth.
Question, Chair. Is there going to be a glossary? It's a report that is full of abbreviations and lots of them aren't defined anywhere. A PPE, for example, which to me stands for personal protective equipment. as much, but it obviously means something completely different to do with land and buildings in this report. I'm curious to know what it is, and also if it can be made more intelligible by defining the other abbreviations.
Thanks, Councillor Lewis. We will update this report at the point we sign off the opinion, so we'll look through that and make sure any abbreviations are clearer. PPE, yes, I mean, I still refer to sort of fixed assets, which is old terminology now, but effectively PPE is fixed assets, land, buildings, equipment, that type of thing. But under the international accounting standards, it's referred to as PPE, property, plant and equipment. But we'll go through this report for any other acronyms like that. Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Truswell.
Yeah, Chair, thanks. I hope you'll forgive me for climbing on one of my hobby horses. And it relates to the section on page 29 regarding MRP and the use of the annuity method for repaying debt. In the past, I kind of gently crossed swords with Praminda regarding the fact that we were admonished as an authority for not having sufficient reserves to deal with a once in 100 years public health challenge. And this kind of, to me, comes from the same sort of stable, because we're told that the method that we've adopted is and I quote, has the consequence of pushing costs into future years and could, conditional could, reduce, all things remaining equal, the council's ability to spend on other service areas in the future. But surely the converse of that is, if we front load more of these repayments into the present and the immediate future, then that is going definitely, not conditionally, but definitely to lead to our having to make greater cuts in order to finance the borrowing in the immediate period. So I'm just hoping, and I appreciate that Praminda says they're going to come back with a bit more detail, or presumably a lot more detail, on this aspect when they're reporting on value for money. But I hope they are conscious that there is this political balance to be struck, and that it's not that easy to say one is right and one is wrong, because we live in the here and now. We're having to respond. I know it's not an accountancy term, but to the financial pressures placed on us over the last 12 years by the incumbent governing party. And, you know, I hope that what they do tell us will be helpful and won't just be that sort of, you know, either or, and that it does take some account of the political pressures that we are elected to address.
Thank you for that, that comment. I think there's a couple of observations to make. Firstly, I think the option you've selected is one that is one of the approved ones. You are required to apply one of the four. So what you're doing is right. I think the key here is around whether you made an informed decision with all the available information. So we've not undertaken sufficient work to give you a view. But if I was going forward sort of a month or so, once we've had a look at it and what we've seen elsewhere, it's around, in coming to that view each year, whether you've had all the available information for you to properly consider, take an informed view, which ultimately, as you rightly say, is a political decision. You know, it's up to you as members what you wish to proceed and which decision you want to make. And if that's been done and you've had all the available information and you decide you want to spend more now and sort of pay back or load the costs a little later, that's a decision which is absolutely right. That must be taken within the overall context of the financial position of the authority. And I think, again, that's something that we've not yet had a chance to look at. So we will comment on it further, but I note what you say.
Chair, just to reinforce, because I left this out, there's a very important phrase that the method that we're employing is not as prudent as other measures. And I welcome Praminda's qualification, but that does seem to be a pretty categorical statement.
Can I just bring in, Councillor Truswell, can I just bring in Victoria Bradshaw, who would make some comments?
Thank you, Chair. I think we just need to be clear on the annuity method. There's two elements to it, and it's like your mortgage. So the level that we repay is the same level over the period. One element of that is your MRP. The other element is the interest. So in the earlier years, you repay less capital and more in the latter years. In the earlier years, you pay more interest and less interest in the latter years, but you pay the same level over the number of years. And therefore, looking at just one element of it isn't really isn't really right, in my opinion. You'd look at it in the whole. And it's the way the annuity level, the annuity model works is that the level of cost is across all years is the same. I would also say that a lot of local authorities use the annuity model. We're not in isolation, and I would say the majority do. And it's one of the models that's been agreed, as Pavinda said, by statute. So, you know, we're not doing anything that we've not been given permission to do. I don't know if Mary wants to add anything to that.
I think I just agree with everything Victoria said there. I think she summarised it.
Yeah, perhaps I kind of didn't articulate my comment sufficiently clearly. There was no attempt to criticise Victoria or the authority for using this method. Quite the reverse. And it was just questioning that there was judgmental language being used in this document before we'd actually looked at the wider perspective that that Paminda referred to.
I was just going to clarify around the annuity model. That was all I was doing. We didn't take it as criticism. Thank you.
Councillor Almas.
Thank you, Chair. My question would be around the Temple Green Park and Ride. Just purely for my understanding, in the ISA 260 report, page 10, in your comments, you say this error has been assessed as a one-off error, given its unique situation. Obviously, the wrong building costs and whatever you have resulted in a total valuation error of almost 16.5 million. How is this valuation approach and process different to the other valuation approaches? And how can you say that this is just a one-off error in this unique situation?
That's a very, very good question. So because this is a development that was sort of progressing, that makes it a little bit more complex. It's quite a large and unusual scheme. It's not the type of thing that you sort of get involved with each year. It's quite unusual. So the other area that we identified an error in, which is around the rolling valuations, those are fairly regular. And because we felt that that's something that could be made again in other areas, that was something that management also agreed then to have a look at. But in this particular one, because it's very, very unique and unusual, it's not the type of thing that there's many of, and that's why it was felt to be a one-off situation. There isn't anything else like that that we could go and have a review of to make sure that that's correct, because it's a bit of a one-off.
Any other questions from members? Councillor Foster? Oh, Linda?
Yeah, just to help me understand a little bit, you talk about the Yorkshire Pension Fund asset revaluations. I guess the first question, are they revaluations or corrections? And is there a time date stamp taken where you refer back to the value of those assets, or are Leeds City Council accounts team looking for a preferential market price? Does that make sense?
Councillor, the valuations are all done by the West Yorkshire Pension Fund, and the valuations that they put on the assets feed into the actuaries' calculations, which then feed into our pension assets in terms of our accounts. So we don't actually have any involvement in carrying out the valuations of those assets. As far as I understand it, the differences have come on the part of the asset portfolio that are not quoted, where there needed to be individual valuations of those funds. So I think it's a timing issue in that they had, at the time that we needed to provide the data to the actuaries in order to provide the pension funds assets as per the IAS 19, they had to work forward from valuations that they'd done. I think between December and March. They subsequently got valuations of those portfolios between April and June, and they've now, in consultation with their auditors, agreed that the valuations as at 31st of March should have been higher. So what's happened in terms of our accounts is that those revised valuations that have been included in the West Yorkshire Pension Fund's final audited accounts have now been fed back into the calculations of our pension assets based on an IAS 19 basis.
Councillor Foster, can I just bring in Gareth?
I was just going to add, thanks, Chair, to Mary's comments in response to Councillor Foster, that updating of asset valuations between a sort of end of December rolled forward to the end of March versus a more crystallised valuation at the end of March is quite typical in local government accounts. So in the other local authorities that Paminda and I are involved with, there does typically be an audit adjustment posted on the asset valuations of their share of the pension fund, because very small movements when you're dealing with such large figures do tend to be, approaching materiality, and added to the fact that the valuation of a council share of a pension fund typically is always a significant audit risk, so there's already more focus on that figure. So a combination of those two things, you do tend to see quite often an adjustment on the valuation of a pension fund asset between the draft accounts and the final account. So the situation at Leeds is not uncommon. Thank you, Chair.
So are all the valuations dated back to the 31st of March?
Yes, they have revised their valuations at 31st of March based on subsequent information. That's what's happened.
And we'll just bring in Paminda.
Yeah, just an observation for information. So other authorities, what we've seen in the same areas, that they did the valuation at the 31st of December and projected it to the end of March. Yeah. And then when they got to the end of March, obviously there'd been a significant increase. So the projections were out, and that's what I think they've now corrected.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's a much more generic question, really. I noticed in the ISA 260 report you refer to significant audit risks, including pensions liability, and you've had some late adjustments for that. And I know that's largely, is beyond your control and beyond the council's control. As far as the audit's concerned, can you give us assurance that the work that you've still got outstanding on journals, which also relates to significant audit risk, is not at risk of giving us any concerns before the accounts are signed off?
The work on journals is ongoing. We can certainly say as of today's date, there's no material issues in terms of our testing of journals to date that would require reporting to this committee. However, I think as Mary said in her introduction, obviously until all the work's concluded, there is a risk of a potential material issue cropping up on journals, or indeed on the other sections of our work that remain ongoing. Past experience would suggest that because the audit is fairly well progressed, and we focused a lot of our work on the riskier areas, that the chances of a material misstatement are not particularly high, but we can't give, I guess, 100% guarantee at this stage. And again, the other point to reiterate is that, if we do find anything material, then clearly we'd have to bring this report and the accounts back to this committee in March. But we're working on the basis that between now and concluding our work, if there's nothing material coming out from that we'll deal with completion of that directly with the chair and with Victoria.
Linda, any further questions from members? Okay. Does the committee agree the recommendations set out in the report to A, receive the audit report of the council's external auditors on the 2020-21 accounts, and to note that there are expected to be no unadjusted audit differences to the accounts. B, to consider the updated 2020-21 statement of accounts and to approve these as the council's final audited accounts, subject to no issues requiring further material adjustments arising as a result of Grant Thornton's remaining audit work, and to authorize the chair to approve any additional non-material amendments which may be recommended by the Chief Finance Officer, and once the audit is complete, to acknowledge this approval on behalf of the committee by signing the appropriate section within the statement of responsibilities on page 1 of the accounts. C, note that should any material adjustments arise as a result of Grant Thornton's remaining audit work, a final version of the statement of accounts will be presented for approval at the next meeting of the committee prior to their publication. D, on the basis of the assurances received, the chair is asked to sign the management representation letter on behalf of the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. Thank you. And we'll move on to item 12, the work programme. Kate.
Yes, there's only 1 month remaining on the work programme, so not a great deal to talk about. Members will note that I've suggested that we remove the annual report of the committee from the March meeting of the committee, instead bringing it to the first meeting of the new municipal year, allowing us to conclude this municipal year fully. That will fit with the routine that's developed in council during the pandemic period of the committee's annual report coming in November. So there shouldn't be any problems. In March's meeting, I will be bringing a proposed work programme for the new municipal year. So should members have any items that they'd like to see on that work programme, please drop me an email and let me know, and we can put that into the melting pot. And I believe that Jonathan would like to have a similar word with you about the internal audit plan.
Yeah, members will be aware that we're bringing the internal audit plan to the meeting in March. So the exercises are ongoing, the meetings across our management team at the moment to put that plan together and various consultations within our own team, liaison with risk and best practice. So just wanted to use this opportunity to ask members if there are any particular areas that you would like us to give assurance on or to consider within that plan. Please get in touch with either myself or Louise Booth, and you can obviously do that outside of the meeting. But we'll be bringing the plan obviously in March. So if you could come back to us within the next couple of weeks, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Are there any comments from members? Okay. Does the committee agree the recommendations that are set out in the report to consider and approve the work programme and meeting dates at Appendix 1 and to recommend any further for inclusion in the 2022-23 work programme? Thank you. The next meeting will take place at 2 o'clock on Friday, the 25th of March, 2022. And that concludes the meeting. Thank you very much.